and welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Christina Hagen, coming to you live from Cape Town. Let me now welcome our presenters tonight, Tegan Carpenter-Kling and Stefan Schoombie. So before Tegan joined BirdLife South Africa, was working on coastal seabirds. She spent 2 years on Marion Island collecting data towards her MSc and PhD research. She was lucky enough to work with 10 seabird species and 2 fur seals, looking at their foraging behavior in relation to environmental variability. Stefan is a PhD student at the Fitzpatrick Institute, and I understand that he's actually just completed his PhD, looking at the fine-scale flight behavior of Southern Ocean seabirds. So congratulations, Stefan. He spent 3 years on the island, but he's been studying the seabirds there for over 8 years. They will share a little bit about what it is like to overwinter on Marion and some of the fascinating research that's happening on the seabirds there. So Tegan and Stefan, you can turn on your videos and then start your presentation as soon as you're ready. As I understand, Tegan will be presenting first and then Stefan will take over. So I can see your screen, so you can take it away.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here this evening, and I'm very excited to share with you some of the amazement that is Marion Island. Marion Island is an absolute paradise for humans and wildlife alike, and it is one of South Africa's most beautiful and most well-kept gems. So Stefan and I were lucky enough to spend a few years on the island collecting data from various seabirds that breed there. And tonight we're going to introduce you to some of these birds and some of the ongoing research that we do on the island on these birds. So the Prince Edward Archipelago consists of 2 islands, actually. It's Marion Island and Prince Edward Island, and they're about 20 kilometers apart. They're located in the Southern Ocean, about halfway between South Africa and Antarctica, smack bang in the middle of the Roaring Forties. So they are young volcanic islands, and they've been approximated not to be older than 1 million years. The volcanic formation of Marion is fairly obvious from its landscapes, and Marion supports over 200 volcanic cones, which are still active, and the last known eruption was in 2004. On the west coast of the island, there's a fairly impressive ash formation called Carpenter-Kling, where years of water erosion has carved away beautiful features into the compacted ash. Then you have something called black lava, which is the youngest lava on the island, and also a field assistant's worst nightmare. It is very brittle and sharp lava, and it's very difficult to walk over. Here on the right-hand side of the screen, I've also put an example of a lava flow, also on the west coast of the island. And I may stand under correction, but I believe this lava flow was formed in 1986. So the islands are positioned in the fast-flowing Antarctic circumpolar current, and the closest landmass to Marion is a similar island group 900 kilometers to the east, the Crozet Archipelago. Because there are no land masses protecting the island from the ferocity of the Roaring Forties and the strength of the Antarctic circumpolar current, the island experiences very extreme weather with precipitation occurring 300 days a year and wind speeds often reaching and going above 100 kilometers an hour. So the west coast is constantly battered by these strong oceans and bad weathers and is characterized by these very jagged and high cliffs, where the east coast of the island, which lies in the lee of the island, is scattered with boulder beaches, which of course is where you can find the largest penguin and seal colonies. Now, even though the location of Marion and the resulting weather may seem terrible to us humans, Marion's location makes it a paradise for marine predators. So before I dive into the animals that breed on Marion, let's have a closer look at the oceanography around the island. So when we think of the ocean, we think of something like this. Endless water from horizon to horizon. To us, it always looks the same, never changing, other than when we have a storm. However, this is not how the seabirds and marine mammals see it. Due to things like the rotation of the Earth, the roughness of the Earth's crust, and the different levels of warmth and sunlight between the equator and the poles, There are numerous oceanographic features such as eddies, fronts, and regions of upwelling that cause pockets of productivity, or in simpler terms, high concentration patches of fish, squid, krill, and krill for marine predators to eat. So here in these pictures, you can see Marion Island indicated by the black dot. And you can see that the island is straddled by these major oceanographic fronts, indicated by the black lines. So these fronts are also rich with prey for the seabirds. And in addition, these fast-flowing fronts interact with underwater mountains and ridges, which causes upwelling of nutrients and mesoscale eddies to form, which aggregate and concentrate nutrients and prey. So I understand this is a lot to take in right now, but the important thing to note is the location of these features are predictable over time, which means the seabirds on Marion, which regularly have to feed very hungry chicks and very fast-growing chicks, know exactly where to go find food. And because food is almost guaranteed for the animals breeding on Marion, every year Marion provides breeding and molting grounds for up to 5 million seabirds and seals, which incorporates 29 species of seabirds and 3 species of seals. The largest bird on the island is one of the great albatrosses, the wandering albatross, who has the largest wingspan of any bird at up to 3.5 meters long. And currently, Marion is home to 40% of the world's wandering albatross population. And these birds are really aptly named. If you look at their foraging distribution, you can see that they distribute widely over the Southern Ocean, from the coastline of South Africa to the frosty coastline of Antarctica. And interesting to note, and likely to avoid competition for food, male and female albatrosses segregate at sea, with females going northward from the island and males foraging to the south. Then you have the 3 smaller albatrosses, or the mollymawks, and they are the grey-headed albatross, the sooty albatross, and the light-mantled albatross that nests along the cliffs on Marion Island. Now, these birds have a more constrained distribution as they have preferences for different oceanographic features. For example, the grey-headed albatross prefers to forage in eddies, where the sooty albatross prefers to forage in warmer waters north of the subtropical front, and the light-mantled albatross prefers to forage along the ice edge of Antarctica. There are also 3 predatory birds on the island, namely the northern giant petrel, the southern giant petrel, and the brown squir. These birds predate on chicks and injured birds and seals on the island. But for the giant petrels, it's normally only the males that you'll find fighting over a carcass. The females go out and forage at sea, preying mainly on squid and fish. Now, even though the northern and southern giant petrels may look very similar, they have very different foraging behaviors at sea. So as you can see here in a paper by Rising et al., northern giant petrels forage north of the island and southern giant petrels forage south of the island. Then, of course, you have everyone's favorite creatures, the penguins, and there are 4 of them on Marion. The king penguin and the gentoo penguin, which are the 2nd and 3rd largest penguin species in the world, and 2 crested penguin species, which is the macaroni penguin and the rockhopper penguin. Now, because these guys can't fly like the other birds, their distribution is much more constrained around the island. However, the foraging range of the birds varies greatly between the species, with the gentoo penguin rarely going into waters deeper than 200 meters, to the king penguin, which prefers to forage 200 kilometers south of the island within the polar front. There are also 12 species of burrowing seabirds breeding on the island, which includes petrels, diving petrels, storm petrels, and prions. And many of these birds have not yet been tracked, except for the great-winged petrel and the white-chinned petrel, which were recently tracked by Pierre Pistorius and team. And they showed even though these birds are much smaller than the albatrosses and giant petrels, they can still perform these impressive migrations to the South African coastline and tend to congregate along the edge of the Gullis Bank. There are other species on the island as well, which include the kelp gull, the crozet shag, the Kerguelen and Arctic tern, and the island's only land bird, the lesser sheathbill, or more enduringly known as paddies. The island is not only a paradise for seabirds, but also supports a healthy population of subantarctic fur seals, Antarctic fur seals, elephant seals, and killer whales. In winter, the island is a pretty quiet place with very few species breeding. During these icy cold months of the year, the gentoo penguin, grey petrels, and great winged petrels lay and have eggs hatch into gorgeous fluffy chicks. You're also able to see large-ish king penguin and wandering albatross chicks, which were born the previous summer but take a full year to grow large enough to fledge. So once spring has sprung, so the island springs back into life. All of the summer breeders return in a rush to start their annual breeding attempt. And this photo by John Dickens of the macaroni colony at Kildalkey Bay, where 2,000 breeding pairs return every year to breed. And amazingly enough, each year, each penguin will return to the same nest to hopefully reunite with the same partner. It's an absolute spectacle of nature to watch. During the last week of September, the colony is a rocky, barren place, and by the second week of October, it is jam-packed full of very noisy penguins. So summer is the time for babies, and all over the island there are eggs hatching and parents desperately trying to feed their forever hungry chicks. And it's not only the seabirds that have babies, but baby fur seals and elephant seal pups are being born too. Autumn brings a more relaxed period to the island, as chicks slowly start to fledge and the penguins and seals take the chance to perform their annual molt and replace their feathers and skins to ensure another year of looking absolutely fabulous, as well as to have a new protective layer to keep them insulated and dry. Due to the island's incredibly diverse fauna and flora, they have the highest protective status available under the South African legislation as a special nature reserve, which means these islands are set aside solely for the purposes of conservation of biodiversity and for research purposes. So in order to perform research on the islands, amazing wildlife, geology, plants, and insects, South Africa has built a state-of-the-art base, fully equipped to enable science and comfortable living on the island. So once a year, the SA Agulhas 2 goes down to Marion to stock the base with enough food and fuel to last the overwintering team until its return the following year. It also takes down the new team for the year and returns the old team to South Africa. The overwintering team can generally be split between logistical staff, which include a medic, diesel mechanic, radio tech, and a base engineer, and then scientific staff, which can include meteorologists, birders, sealers, botanists, and geomorphologists. Stefan and I were both birders when we went down to Marion, but he'll touch more on the data we collected and his portion of the talk. So across the island, there are also 9 field huts, which are stocked with beds, food, and gas to keep the field workers warm and fed while they are away from base collecting data. This is Rook's hut, and typically this is what they look like. On the one side, you have a food store and the gas bottles, and on the other side, the living quarters, which has 2 bunk beds, a little table to eat on, and a small kitchenette fully stocked with a gas stove and a radio to make comms with people at base. And because the island is a special nature reserve, we try and leave as small a footprint as we can while we're there. But this means there's no other way to get around other than walking. And the walking is pretty tough going. As a wetland and one of the wettest places on earth, the field assistants need to daily battle with mires and bogs and very harsh weather conditions. And in order for the field assistants to get all their work done for the year, it is estimated that they can walk between 5,000 to 10,000 kilometers over a single year. Now, this seems like a relatively good place to give the reins over to Stefan, who will go into more detail about the work the birders do on the island.
All right, so yeah, let's see how much time I have left. So it's quite a lot of things to work in such a small, short amount of time. So I'll do my best, but at least you'll get some pretty pictures of what's happening on Marion Island. Yeah, we're working on the seabirds. We're very lucky to be immersed in their lives and get really up close and personal. And this also gives us the opportunity to see exactly just how big these birds are. Okay, now this thing is not advancing. So you could just see a picture of someone next to a wandering albatross, and it just really gives you a sense of the scale. And we're very privileged to work with these birds in such a way, as normally you would only see them from the bow of a ship or through binoculars. And because we're in such an isolated place, these birds are not used to humans, and especially the youngsters, if you sit still for long enough, they would actually come up to you and sometimes get a bit too close for comfort. Yeah, so just to go through a summary of the work that we do, I'll broadly define this in 4 categories. One is monitoring, the second is round island population counts. Then in recent years, we've been deploying a bunch of data loggers that Tegan also showed some data from. And then I'll touch on a subject called night birding, where we look at the smaller petrels. So I'll just give a brief overview of the bird's life cycle on these subantarctic islands, just to put some context to the monitoring that we do. So the seabirds are not really reliant on land for their general life, as they get all their food from the ocean. So they happily spend years out at sea, just after they leave the island as chicks. But then they come back to the island for breeding purposes. So they would come back to court, and this is the image of wandering albatrosses. And this is something you see often as the breeding season starts, is you have a large aggregation of birds, and then they start to court each other to try and find a mate. And they will do their fancy dance moves. And once they get a partner that likes what they see, they will continue to strengthen their bonds. And in the end, when they find the right partner, they will, let's say, tie the knot. Because most of the seabirds breeding on these islands are called monogamous birds. So that means that they mate for life. They choose one partner and they stick with that partner, and they only breed with that partner. Now, of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but in general terms, we'll assume that this is the case for most of the birds that breed on Marion. So this example from wandering albatross perspective, but this is true for most of the birds, smaller petrels, and also the penguins that breed on Marion. So once they have their partner, they will start building a nest. Here we have the Gentoo penguin bringing some nest material for its mate. And they're not all equally good at this. So yeah, we have a graded albatross chucking some mud on his partner, which this is a clip from a video, and shortly after he got bitten and chased away, so that his partner can continue building the nest. And then when they have a nice nest, they will lay a single egg. Most of the birds breeding on Marion only lay 1 egg, but there are some of the penguin species that lay multiple eggs or relay one if they have failed. But generally speaking, they only lay 1 egg. So once they have a nest and laid an egg, this is where our monitoring starts. So this is quite an intensive bit of work, especially initially during the breeding season. And yeah, you see a whole team of probably 2 birders and some volunteers that go out with marker poles into a nice snow squall. They'll soon get pummeled by ice pellets, but this is what we sign up for. So how the monitoring would work is we mark each of the nests with a number, and this is a subsection of the population of breeding birds. So we identify area, and there we mark the nests. And then the birds within these monitoring colonies are all marked with a metal ring. And this is a unique ID that's given to each bird. And these metal rings, the idea is that they keep this for life. So that ring will stay on their leg, and we'll be able to see who's who and what age the birds get to. What we also do in the monitoring colonies is ring the birds with a PVC plastic ring with larger letterings on it. And this is just for easy identification. You can see on this bird's right leg, you can easily see the number. And this is just to minimize the disturbance as we're doing the nest checks. So at this stage, we try and identify both partners that are nesting at a particular nest. And once we have identified that, we do round about monthly checks to see how they progress, as their incubation periods are quite long for these large birds. For example, the large wandering albatross will breed basically for 12 months, and about 4-ish of those months will be spent sitting on an egg. And then we follow the fate of the nest to see how many of the eggs hatch and how many of the chicks actually survive. Here we have a skua harassing a gentoo penguin, and yeah, this is some of the typical things the birds have to go through. Then once the chicks hatch, the island explodes with cuteness. And this is the time when the birds are most vulnerable, the small chicks. So we do more often nest checks during this period, just to see if the eggs actually hatch, and at what stage, if a chick doesn't survive, at what stage that happens. And I'll share a lot of pictures because this is what people like to see. And yeah, we're very privileged to see these nice images. This is a sooty albatross. Some people don't like their look; they look intimidating. But yeah, I did my MSc on them, so I'm very fond of them. And then some chicks are more cute than others. The previous one's a king penguin chick, and here's a gentoo penguin, and you'll see there's 2 chicks, but generally only one of them survive. Here's a macaroni penguin. This is a grey petrel chick, which is a burrowing bird, which I'll get to in a bit. And a small wandering albatross chick that will grow up to be a large, majestic wandering albatross with a 3-meter wingspan. And lastly, brown skua. These are probably some of the cutest chicks, and they grow up to be very vicious predators. So we enjoy them while they're cute, but yeah. Okay, then once the birds are large enough to start moving around and annoy their parents, they get left alone. This is a gentoo penguin chick. They're very entertaining to watch. Here we have a grey-headed albatross chick. This is in a colony, and yeah, at this stage they're left alone, and they only have giant petrels and skuas as predators. So once they get to this age, they're relatively safe, and they will probably be able to fly away once they grow all their flight feathers. And it's at this stage that we ring all the birds in the monitoring colony. So every nest that we marked, if there's a chick at the end of the season, we put a metal ring on their left leg. And this is a very clever system where birds that are banded as adults get a ring on the right leg, while the chicks get a ring on the left leg. And by that way, if we see a bird with a ring on the left leg, we can know that we know the age of that bird because we ringed it as a chick. And another way that we monitor them, just because the nest chicks can be a bit difficult, is to use camera traps. So this is a camera trap on a wandering albatross chick. And this allows us to see what might be bugging the birds. They were particularly installed to look for mice, but we have also seen giant petrel predation. And you get some funny images as well when you work through the data, and some really beautiful shots as well. Okay, that was an example of wandering albatrosses, but all the birds are not that easy to work with. The wandering albatrosses are relatively easy, as you can easily get access to the nests. But Sooty albatross here, for example, is a bit more difficult, as these birds are cliff nesting, as Tegan showed before. And yeah, we often need to use ropes as added safety, as this is quite dangerous to work with these birds. Another challenge is burrowing birds. Now, this is something we on the mainland of South Africa is not really familiar with, but on Marion Island, actually, the bulk of the population of birds are found underground. And this is a photo. Every single one of those holes is a South Georgian diving petrel nest. And this is actually at about 800 meters elevation, which is quite impressive, as we generally don't walk in those areas because it's quite harsh weather. And these birds, for some reason, choose to breed there. Yeah, we have a white-chinned petrel that you often see while out at sea. And yeah, they're quite easy. They're a bit easier to access as they have really large burrows. But generally what we have to do here is use technology to our advantage. And we use something called a burrowscope, which is a camera attached to a cable which runs to a screen. So you stick your hand into a hole and you can see what's happening down there. And yeah, this enables us to see what's going on underground. So here we have a great-winged petrel nest that's being monitored, blue petrel, and South Georgian diving petrel. And this allows us to monitor these birds as well. And then just a very exciting thing that happened in 2019, we discovered storm petrels breeding again, and they were thought to, they were basically wiped out by the cats in the late 1980s. But now it seems that they're back, and we found this breeding pair and a couple of others. So hopefully they'll bounce back if we can get rid of the mice. Okay, next is the round island counts. Just see how we're doing for time. Yeah, this is to get an idea of the total population of several or most of the birds breeding. But yeah, well, this will basically be limited to the surface nesters. So this involves a lot of looking through binoculars. So here we have a scan count of cliffs. So all the little white dots you see on that picture, at the bottom is penguins, and at the top of the cliffs are grey-headed albatrosses. So thousands of birds that we count. So basically we walk around the whole island and count these birds at the various stages of their breeding. For this, we'll mainly do two counts, one just after most of the eggs have been laid to get an idea of the total breeding population. And then we'll do another count towards the end of the season to get an idea of the breeding success for that particular species. The larger the colonies, the more difficult the counts are. For example, wandering albatrosses, there are about 2,000 odd breeding pairs. And you can basically walk up to each one of those nests and count them by physically going to a nest. But here we have a colony of grey-headed albatrosses at an area called Rooks Peninsula. And it's very difficult to count this, as when you look through binoculars, yeah, very easily these things become a blur. It's quite difficult to count. This is even more so when you look at these massive king penguin colonies that Tegan also showed with those magnificent shots from John Dickens, and macaroni penguins as well, which can very easily just become a blur when you look at it. So for these, we use a bit of a different strategy where it's more estimates than actual direct counts. Now, why do we do this? These long-term counts, counts being done every single year, is very important in science, as it gives us an opportunity to look at trends in these populations. So you can see over a long period of time what are the populations doing, and then you can look for drivers of those population changes, being it fisheries or climate change, or whatever might be driving the changes in their populations. Another thing I'll briefly touch on is work done on penguins, and this is for CAMLAR, which is the, let me get this right, Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. This is basically a treaty that, international treaty that South Africa is part of. So we look at the diet of these birds. So we do diet sampling to see what they've eating, and also weigh the chicks, which is quite a muddy affair. We weigh the chicks to see how healthy the populations are, and this gets reported to international bodies. Then this is a site of millions of smaller prions, and this is something we sometimes see, but you don't see this on land, on Marion. And also when the sun sets, you see thousands of birds coming in, but during the day you don't see them out on the vegetation. The reason for this is, well, one of the reasons is that the skuas are vicious predators, and if a smaller petrel shows its face during the day, they will immediately be taken out by these birds, and also giant petrels. So to study them, we have to go out at night, which is not, which is very challenging in a sub-Antarctic climate. But we go out at night, and basically, if you shine a bright torch, you can count birds, and trained eye can even identify birds as they fly by. Yeah, and this is what we call night birding. When, for those who have experienced this, it's quite a nice experience. And this allows us to see a lot of birds that you generally won't see up close. This is a black-bellied storm petrel that we were very excited to find a nest of. Unfortunately, we didn't find an egg, so we haven't confirmed the breeding yet. This is a common diving petrel, which are also really interesting birds. And one of the most beautiful birds for me is a fairy prion. And then this is a great winged petrel. Unfortunately, the cover of darkness does not necessarily always provide protection. As most of you listening to this should know, we have a big problem with mice on Marion Island, which I won't go into too much detail, as I understand there's a talk on this by Anton Wolfart a bit later. But I'll just say this, that the mice are also interested in anything that remotely looks like electrical cabling. So our attempts to film the mice and so on has often been hampered by them destroying our equipment. And they also have affinity for my hand. This was a bird that a mouse that I filmed with the burrowscope while it was attacking the great winged petrel chick. And as soon as I stuck the torch into the burrow, the mouse immediately ran for my hand and nibbled at my finger, which immediately resulted in me pulling the camera out of the burrow. All right, and then I'll just lastly touch on some of the work that I did for my PhD. So we deployed cameras and a whole bunch of other loggers on some of the albatrosses to see exactly how they fly while they're out at sea. And I'll try and show, oh, I don't know if that's working. If the video is not playing, Christina, you must stop me. But here we have a wandering albatross taking off from Marion Island. And I just find this completely fascinating to see from the bird's perspective, just what they go through when they're flying. They look so graceful when you look at them, but it seems like quite a rough ride when you see it from their perspective. And yeah, so this is just a nice thing to end off with. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening.
Great. Thank you so much, Stefan and Tegan. That was really fascinating to get an insight into a little bit of what it's like to live on the island. I'm very jealous. I would love to go there. I will have to settle for going on flock to Marion and seeing some of these birds at sea. And hopefully a lot of our listeners will also be joining us on that. So Tegan, you can also switch on your camera. You have, good. Before we get to some questions, please everyone participate in the post-webinar survey, which will pop up when you exit the webinar. It'll only take about 2 minutes for you to fill in. And then next week, as Stefan mentioned, so we're sticking with our island theme, and Nini van der Merwe will present on the Gough Island restoration program, where they are attempting to eradicate mice from Gough Island. And then at the end of her talk, Dr. Anton Wolfart will give us a short update on the Mouth-Free Marion project. And I will post links in the chat box to how to register for those talks. So there are quite a few questions coming into the Q&A box, and please keep those coming, and we'll try and get to them all in time. So there were quite a few questions about the ringing. So how you catch the birds and whether the metal rings cause any damage. So I don't know who wants to take that, maybe Tegan, how you go through how you catch the birds to ring them or to do anything with them.
So the birds, they've evolved on this island with no predators at all. So they're not scared of us. They don't see us as a threat. So you really can walk straight up to them on their nests, and to prevent them vomiting on you or causing any damage, you just you've got a hook on the end of a stick, and you put it around their neck slowly and pull their head forward, and then you grab the back of their skull and then just pick them up like a chicken. They're very sweet. It doesn't cause them any stress or any harm. And then it's the very standard procedure of putting a ring on them. I haven't seen any of the metal rings chafing them. Maybe, Stefan, have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, it does happen from time to time, especially with larger males that like rub the rings. But that's why when we do these round island counts, we go up to every single nest and we inspect the birds. So we look for, we call it retraps. So we go and look at the bird's leg, and if there's a ring, we read it. And that's the whole point of it, is to see which birds are coming back and what age and so on. But if at that stage we see any ring that looks like it might be opening, we remove it and put a new one or so on. So that's we keep monitoring that. But yes, it does occasionally happen that a bird gets chafed by the rings, but that's why it's important for us to keep monitoring as well, especially the birds that we impact, to make sure that if that on a off occasion happens, we can immediately rectify.
Yeah, and I think also having good training and skills on putting the rings on in the first place also will help prevent that. And then Christoph asks about counting the birds and whether you use drones to count the birds. Maybe Stefan, you want to take that one?
Actually want to pull John in on this one.
Yeah.
No, we really would love to, but it's very difficult. Obviously, the big thing with using drones is what effect does that have on the birds themselves. But on Marion Island, you very rarely have a day that's not very windy. So you will most likely lose your drone if you fly it. So yeah, I mean, this is something that will probably be in the future, but I'm not sure if we're there yet. But then also there's logistical problems with flying drones and so on. So at the moment we're not using it, but I know they have the French have trialed drones to see what effects they have on different birds and so on. So it's definitely something that I'm sure will be used in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the way things are going. And you also have to worry about the giant petrels and skuas probably attacking the drones. I know that kelp gulls here tend to do that with drones.
Well, we had a drone fly on Marion on 2 occasions now, where they do, it's geomorphologists from the university, or from UNISA, it's Dave Heading, that they flew a drone to look at the vegetation, but this wasn't over bird colonies. But interestingly, we did like a quick fly around just to see how the skuas and giant petrels reacted, and they didn't really seem interested. So,
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
And I see John Dickens has posted in the chat that they've used drones or UAVs at South Georgia very successfully and used safely and correctly. They're invaluable tools. So hopefully that'll be coming soon for Marion.
Yeah.
And then Colin de Kock asks, how long does a round island take? So Tegan, maybe you want to answer that?
Colin, that really depends on which birds you're counting and how many people you have helping you. If you're counting wandering albatrosses that tend to nest all over the place and you need to walk to each nest and look at the ring, like Stefan says, and you're alone, it can take a week if you're very quick. But yeah, generally it takes between a week and 10 days, but depending on how much help you have and how many birds you have to count.
Okay. And then just back to the rings, Jane Turner asks why metal rings are used rather than plastic. Stefan?
Sorry, just repeat. I'm looking for the.
Why are metal rings used rather than plastic rings? Do you know?
Oh, well, the plastic rings, they break, so the birds can lose them. So the problem is if we put a ring on a chick, some of these birds, they get older than 40 years. I mean, we only started ringing in I think it was John Cooper in 1974, where they started putting rings on the birds, and some of those birds are still alive. So for Marion, we haven't got the oldest bird yet, because it's the first one that was ringed. Some of those birds are still alive. So if you put a plastic ring on, and after 10 years the bird loses the ring, there's absolutely no way to identify that bird again. So it's very important for them to keep the rings on them, and yeah, plastic breaks.
Yeah. And now Shahar has a question about the loggers. So Tegan, you can take this one. What are some of the insights from loggers on albatrosses? I know you did a lot of logger work for your PhD.
So I think Stefan and I can answer this question. So I did more like a large scale, and I just did GPS of where they go. So I did a multi-year study and a multi-species study. And I looked at when those oceanographic features that I spoke about, when they changed with climate variability, how the albatrosses changed their distribution. Were they able to track these features that concentrate and aggregate their prey, or weren't they? And we found that they generally did very well, but I did track them during incubation, where they spend a very long time away from the island, up to 2 weeks before coming back. But parents or bird parents that are feeding chicks, their trips are much shorter, so that still needs to be looked into. And then what Stefan did is he looked at the fine scale movement of the animal. So he used things like the cameras and accelerometers, and I think depth. So he can tell you a bit more about the fine scale movements from the loggers.
Yeah, so we used like an integrated system with a whole range of loggers, accelerometers, magnetometers, cameras, GPS, and so on. And that was just to see at fine scale. So these things log at 40 hertz, which is 40 data points per second. and you can from that see basically how the bird is turning into the wind and so on. So I looked quite a lot at how the birds react to wind itself. So we used telemetry data to estimate the conditions they fly in, and from the accelerometers we could even pick up individual wing flaps, so you can see exactly how many times the birds flap their wings, which was surprisingly high for an albatross. Yeah, which I haven't quite figured out, because when you look at them from ships, they don't flap. They're known as birds that don't flap, but from the accelerometer data, they seem to flap quite a lot, especially in light winds, which is often when you won't see them on a ship, because they won't catch you. So it's a bit difficult to observe these things, and these loggers give us the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, yeah, as you say, albatrosses are the gliders of the seabird world, supposedly.
Yeah.
Very interesting what technology can tell us when we can't actually observe things. And now on to a bit of a sadder topic around some of the threats on the island. I know you didn't delve into it too much in your presentation, but people are asking about the mice on Marion, and sort of how serious a threat is it, and what proportion of chicks are killed and injured. I don't know who wants to jump in with this one.
Definitely Stefan. Definitely know more than me.
Yeah, well, is it a big problem? It's a massive problem. So I mean, it's difficult to show the extent of the problem without grossing people out too much. So I mean, those images of blood and gore, you know, it's off-putting. So we had Tom Peshak on the island in, I think, 2018, which is a world-renowned photographer for National Geographic, and he kept talking about finding that balance between a beautiful picture and still a gory picture, which puts the message across. And I mean, that's what he does for a living, so he did it really well. But it's very difficult to show the extent of the problem and still keep the attention of people. So it's, you know, it's definitely a big problem. And I think personally, the bigger problem is that we can't see what's happening underground. So as I said, most of the birds, what do you call it, biomass of animals are underground, and we can't see what's happening there. And the birds at the surface, so albatrosses and so on, they really only get bothered at night. We don't see the mice coming out during the day. But underground, the mice aren't worried about that. So those birds that are now recovering after the cats have been removed, there's no way to say how long that recovery will last. If the mouse populations increase to a point where these birds are now also taken out, it might push them over the edge. So it's definitely a very big problem.
Absolutely. It's very concerning, the numbers of mice and the numbers of seabirds that they can take out. And that's why BirdLife has partnered with the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment to take on this challenge of trying to eradicate mice from the island. It's a conservation measure that's very tricky and expensive to implement, but will have massive benefits if we are successful. So I'd urge everyone to tune in to next week's webinar with Nini and Anton. So Nini will tell everyone about the Gough Island restoration program, where they've just completed baiting of the island to get rid of the mice. And then Anton, who's the project manager for the Mouse-Free Marion project, will give a quick update on what the project is trying to achieve and where we are in the process. And also I'd urge everyone to go to mousefreemarion.org and if you have the ability to donate to this very, very worthwhile cause, you can sort of sponsor a hectare of the island to help with our fundraising efforts. And I think it's 1,000 Rand for a hectare. So it would make a good Christmas present coming up, I'm sure. Then John Dickens asks about the diving petrels on the island, whether they're both common and South Georgia diving petrels.
Yeah. Yeah, so they were also thought to have been wiped out by the cats, but yeah, both of them are definitely breeding again. Yeah, so we have, I would say, quite a large population again now. We're still working on that data, but yeah, definitely both species.
Great. And we're coming up to 8 o'clock, so we'll just have a couple more questions. Reinhold asks about some of the other threats, to what extent the islands have been affected by pollution, oil spills, and then also plastic. I don't know, Tegan or Stefan, who wants to take that?
Well, I can answer, then Stefan can add. I don't think the islands themselves are impacted too extremely. I don't think, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any recent oil spills, or I'm not sure if any nurdles have ever been found there. Stefan can add. But I think the greatest threat to the seabirds is probably at sea, when they come across fishing vessels that don't have the proper mitigation methods in place, and they are caught, or they try to go for the fish or the hooks or the bait, and they do drown and become bycatch. Or if they enter our waters and happen upon an oil spill there, I think that's their greatest threat.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's not the same as we have here, but we do definitely see plastic there. So I mean, we part of the Department of Environmental Affairs, Oceans and Coast branch is to do a beach. What do you call them, Tegan? The
beach cleanup, or I can't remember the name anymore. Yeah. But yeah, every month we go and walk along the beaches and pick up as much plastic as we can find, and we categorize it and get it all in a data sheet for the department.
Yeah, and so I mean, there is definitely plastic that washes up. It's thought that that's mostly from fishing vessels, so probably not from the mainland. But then what we do see in the birds is plastic fragments in their diet. So they eat plastic. So what would happen is you hear the term microplastics all along. So it's fragmented pieces of plastic that you have a bottle cap that breaks up into tiny millimeter by millimeter fragments. And the seabirds perceive this as food. For example, a toothbrush or a lighter or something floating, the birds would think that's a piece of food, and they would grab it. So particularly like red and blue is often colors we see. And then we would see this in the diet of the birds. And you would see plastic fragments in the colonies that you walk through. And this is from birds regurgitating squid beaks and things, and then the plastic ends up there. So it's potentially a big problem. Dr. Mayal Conan from Nelson Mandela University she's busy working on data from that to look at what level of pollution are the birds taking into their into their systems from this plastic that's in their diet. So yeah, it's not something that's massive, like you don't see a bottle and big things in the birds' diets, but on that small scale, it's affecting the birds, and it's concerning, definitely.
Well, it's great to hear that there's some research being done on that. So we'll just go to one last question. It actually came through in the chat from Shashi Kassen, asking about the kind of more human side of things, being on this very remote island for a whole year, asking about the sort of social isolation, and do you have what contact do you have with the outside world? So maybe just a few words on the team that's there and how you all get along, and because I know there's a lot of teamwork and camaraderie that gets built up over the year.
Well, I found while I was on the island, I've never been as social or interacted with more humans. I mean, you're living in a base with 20 people and you have dinner every night, you have games nights, you have movie nights. And then, of course, there's always some friction and people get lonely and want to go home. And then you just go outside and it's wonderful. There's animals everywhere. There's beautiful landscapes. You can hike, you can walk. So for me personally, it didn't affect me too much. The base, it does have a satellite link and internet and Wi-Fi and cell phones, and you can phone home. But it does affect some people. But I think being around the team does help. And those people that don't want to be around the team, it's just knowing that the year is going to end and they will eventually go home.
Yeah.
How did you find it, Stefan?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's a stressful environment being in an isolated place. So I can't remember if you said, Tegan, but the ship drops the team there and it's 13 months and there's no way for you to get off that little island. So yeah, it's a stress. It's a high, like it can cause high stress when things go wrong. But I would just say if someone wants to go, they must want to do it. That's basically what it's down to. Generally, if someone is in two minds if they should have done this or not, they might struggle a bit. But yeah, there's a team of people, and we also have support from South Africa's side. So I think it's much better now than it was in the past, where they only had a radio skid once a week where everyone could listen what you were saying to your loved ones. Now we have landline and we have internet and WhatsApp that you can communicate with people back home. So that definitely makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. But yeah, without a doubt, a very special place to be able to spend a year. And I'm sure I saw there were a few messages coming in the chat of other Marionites listening and saying brings back great memories. So I think we will leave it there. Thank you very, very much for your presentation and your photos and sharing a bit of insight into life on Marion. I don't know if you have any last words that you want to say. No?
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. I mean, we really love talking about Marion, and yeah, that's our way of giving back, is to show the pictures of what we are able to experience there. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Cool, great, thank you. And thanks to our audience for tuning in, and please do join us next week. I will leave the room open for a little bit longer in case people want to pop messages in the chat. But yes, thank you very much, Tegan and Stefan, and good night, everyone.
Cheers, thanks.
Great, thanks everyone, cheers.